This program contains subject matter and language that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Halito Tribe, I'm your host, Chief Cali, checking back in with you for another episode of Our Story, 1968, Indian Civil Rights. Now, when we met last, we were introduced to some of those Americans that I told you would be featured throughout various episodes of Season 1 of this docuseries, presenting information that will help many of you watching get a new or possibly a better understanding of exactly what Season 1 of this docuseries is all about. Now, for those of you who took that mental note, tucked it away safely, and kept it inside of your mental stash box when I made this mention previously, then you can recall me stating that yes, although we are highlighting the year of 1968, the Civil Rights Movement, and also the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if you just sit back, relax, and hopefully allow us, as creators of this docuseries, keep our promise to you, the youth, the parents, the viewers of this presentation, and do as we said we would, which is give our best effort at walking you very slow through each specific topic of information assigned to each specific episode of this docuseries. By the time we make it to the end of the road of Season 1, as I stated once before, many of you who will get the understanding that the whole time you were watching this, it never fully was about the Civil Rights Movement or even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But it had everything to do with those people. Those people of the Civil Rights Movement who were fighting right alongside Dr. Martin Luther King for the rights of Indians. And then suddenly came up missing after the assassination of Dr. King. Right. Yes. Those people who at one point in their lifetime identified on this land amongst each other as Americans. Not only Americans, but American Indians. Before they were reclassified to such names as colored, Negroes, blacks, and African Americans. Well, if y'all are ready, then I'm ready. Let's jump back into our story.
We're not asking permission. We're gonna tell our story, and you're gonna listen. I'm trying.
They don't know our story. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in, but we still gonna do what we want to. Touching conversations, a bunch of apologizing and explaining, but we live and we learn. Hey, I bet they ain't think that we would make it, but we overcame it. This shit ain't nothing to play with. Family over everything is still the same shit, and I wouldn't trade it for nothing. Nah, we've been through hell and back, but we're still standing on all 10. Hey, you know how we do it, we go all in. Yeah, it's us over everybody. It's about when it's trouble in paradise. Those and motherfuckers wanna hear about it. Let's be clear about it. We don't make decisions based on their opinions. We can't expect, nor can we make them see the vision, as long as we know the business. Cause they don't know our story. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in, but we still gonna do what we want to. Never said it would be easy, but when you commit this shit, you gotta keep on fighting for who in what you believe in. Believe it, 'cause I ain't going nowhere, baby. I'll be here till the end of time. Take no chances, I won't jeopardize. You know I won't, 'cause true love only happens once. I know my past ain't pretty, yeah, but she still ride with me, yeah. You see, this ain't for everybody. I was trouble in paradise. Nosy motherfuckers wanna hear about it. Let's be clear about it. We don't make decisions based on their opinions. We can't expect, nor can we make them see the vision, as long as we know the business. 'Cause they don't know how it started. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in, but we still gon' do what we want to.
This is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Up to 5,000 blacks are believed to have moved to Ghana from North America, the Caribbean, Brazil and Europe. For many, it's been a bittersweet homecoming.
Yes, this is home. This is our new home. We've been here approximately 5 weeks now. Of course, we've been in Ghana going on 4 months.
And this is where we plan to have our entertainment room, which is...
Dr. Adwoa Asatiwa left a university professorship to move to Cape Coast with her husband, Kwaku.
We decided to relocate.
As expected, they found they can live in relative luxury on their savings.
So if you're going to retire, this is a better option than going to Florida? Or...
Oh, absolutely. Well, Florida, if you go to Florida, you have to start with $1 million up front, and that's not going to buy you too much in Florida.
But they've had to come to terms with a disturbing discovery. The Africans they see as brothers and sisters see them as strangers.
We wanted to feel like we had come home. However, we later found that we weren't that welcome by the native population. We weren't welcome is because they don't know us, and we don't know them.
It takes just a short visit to the local market to see the gulf of 500 years of separation.
I don't want smoke, I want fresh.
Most locals don't even regard them as fellow blacks.
You have Groova, I want Groova.
They call them a Bruni, meaning whites.
How much you gonna charge me? And don't charge me old Bruni prices. Beanie. If you charge me old Bruni, I don't buy. I like you, so I'm gonna buy. I'll pay 1,000, but I know you overcharge me.
So is she a Bruni?
Bruni.
She's a Bruni, is she?
Yeah.
So I'm not old Bruni. I'm Bibini.
Okay.
Okay, yo, Ashanti. It is not a very pleasing way to be identified. You know, we don't want to be called O'Bruni because we certainly weren't treated like O'Bruni in the U.S. By any stretch of the imagination. We were treated as African people. So that is a challenge.
She's also found that people have little sympathy for them as descendants of slaves.
They don't know the history. They don't know who we are. They don't know that we are Abebu. They don't know that we are descendants of the Africans that were taken here through enslavement into the various Americas. They don't understand that for the most part. But our task and our challenge is to bring this information back to our brothers and sisters here.
Happen a lot. I've talked about before on here, and you see me in posts talk about it, that, you know, I know that I am Native American. I am not from Africa.
All right, we're going to jump right into this lesson, but first, let's identify that Frederick Douglass knew the so-called African Americans were in fact indigenous to America. All right, I want to read from this book real quick. The chief tribe inhabiting the semi-mountainous sagebrush-covered territory of Utah are the Indians of the same name, pronounced Utahs, all in a more or less savage condition, but with the exception of a few scatter bands at peace,
or at worst on terms of armed neutrality with the whites. Pahutas, Pahides, Shoshones, Lukuraka, or sheep eaters, etc., are the names of some of the smaller bands. Most of them are low class, closely approximating to the diggers, and poor in the extreme. The Goships are perhaps the most wretched of them all. So let's go down, get some more on these Utahs. They are very considerably inferior to even the despised Indians of California, inferior to all the races of savages on our continent, inferior to the Hottentots, and actually inferior in some respects to the Kitches of Africa. Such of them as we saw along the road and hanging about the stations were small, lean, scrawny creatures, in complexion a dull black, like the ordinary American Negro. So they were comparing these tribes to the American Negro. The government has always known that. Frederick Douglass knows as well. Even when you look at the magazines, they have magazines called Copper Romance. On these magazines, you see our women on the front of these magazines. Why would they use that term copper? Even during the times of the Cotton Club, they had magazines called Copper Colored Gals. Why would they use that term copper colored? We got to ask ourselves, why would they use that term copper colored? Because they understood the 1828 definition of American in the Webster's Dictionary, which says a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races. Why would they use that term copper for our people and use the same definition in the dictionary? Make the correlation. Frederick Douglass, in his own paper on January 22nd, 1852, Frederick Douglass had his own section in the paper called the Colonization Scheme, into where he said, there is no sentiment more universally entertained nor more firmly held by the free colored people of the United States than that this is their own, their native land, and that here, for good or for evil, their destiny is to be wrought out. Why was he saying their destiny is to be wrought out? He was referring to a man named Robert Finley in 1816 who started something called the American Colonization Society, and where they was trying to push the indigenous Black Americans to West Africa. They wanted us to go there willingly. They also started something called the Universal Negro Improvement Association, where they wanted to try to force all of the so-called African Americans who are actually indigenous Americans. They wanted to force us to willingly go to Liberia and set up Liberia. In fact, indigenous Americans founded Liberia. Okay? So Frederick Douglass has always known he himself is indigenous. You can Google that. There's also an article with Frederick Douglass called The Folly of Colonization, into which he said, it is the proposition to colonize the colored people of America in Africa or somewhere else. Happily, this scheme will be defeated, both by its impolicy and its impracticability. It is all nonsense to talk about the removal of 8 million of the American people from their homes in America to Africa. Why did he say that? Why didn't he say Africans moving back home to Africa? Because Frederick Douglass understood that the people you call African Americans are in fact the original indigenous people of America. Bottom line.
Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here.
So yeah, basically, I think what people need to understand is that when it comes down to the indigenous people that look like myself, or have indigenous heritage, we would say, and are tied to certain tribes that were obviously at a certain time frame going into what we call 1820s, 1830s, you know, they were no longer attached to these tribal situations from what they try to show with the treaties and stuff. But what needs to be understood is, we could jump from that 1820 time frame, the Indian removal time frame, and you can walk up a trail back to see when we get to like the 1900s that people are still knowing who they are in the system. But there's a term that's being used for a lot of these areas, and it's called the free person of color, or that free Negro term that we still use to this day in our culture, the word Negro. And it's crazy because now we look at the word Negro and the Indian, and you look at what's going on into, say, World War II. This is like in the 1930s. So when they talk about this World War II going on around the world, and that people who look like me and our ancestors that fought in World War II, and now in a certain place, as an example, would be Virginia. And Virginia happens, and I have a source for it, says that, and the name of the source is Who is an Indian and Who is a Negro? This is Virginia Indians in World War II draft. And it says it's by Paul T. Murray. Now, it says, who is an Indian, who is a Negro? How does one decide a person's race? Few Americans have ever had the occasion to ponder deeply these questions. In most cases, the answer is self-evident. A racial label is usually assigned by reference to obvious physical criteria, such as skin color, hair texture, and facial characteristics. But in any multiracial society, there are some people who cannot be neatly placed into one of a limited number of categories. Further, in society where one's social position depends heavily upon race, resolving questions of racial classification becomes a serious issue. People of mixed race may attempt to improve their position by changing their racial designation. Such an attempt forces government officials to confront directly the delicate issue of determination of race. Their decisions have far-reaching consequences, not only for the people directly involved, but also for the entire society. Now, the next paragraph is where it gets interesting to go to my point. During the Second World War, it says a small group of Virginia Indians challenged the prevailing system of racial classification. When called to register with the Selective Service system, they listed their race as Indian. Local draft boards, however, would not accept this claim. They recall that in antebellum days, some of their registrants' ancestors had married free Negroes. Based on this evidence, the boards insisted that the proper classification for all alleged Indians was Negro. The Indians were adamant in refusing this designation. Draft board members were equally determined not to classify the men as Indians because such a classification would mean that they would be sent to the military service together with whites. For 5 years, the Indians appealed this decision through the channels of the state and the Federal Selective Service Bureau. Now that source, and the person that wrote it is touching on something, because, when we get from the 1930s to World War, people fighting in the World War II and stuff, and then, they come back from the war, right? They know, especially those particular group of people in Virginia, who, before they went into the war, they were Indians. Whatever tribe in the area, shout out to all the tribes in what we call today the state of Virginia. And at the same time, though, you got these people having to register as Negroes. In some cases, not having no mixture with actually people that might be Negroes, but free Negroes. You see it said that. But not all of them have that mixture, and they're still having to be registered as Negroes. And that makes only sense because only Indians that look or could be, misclassified for a Negro would be Indians that look like us. So, or indigenous people of their tribes in that area that look like us. and now they're having to register on their paperwork as a Negro. So that is very important for our people in the past to understand, that we understand now, to give to our people now in the present, that we understand what happened. And the people during the civil rights that knew who they were and still was identifying with what their cultural marker is for the tribal nature of their people, knew that in the system they had to register as free persons of color when it came to getting jobs or working for the military or certain different things. That last source that I read from is proof of that. And then obviously when we get to the 1960s with Martin Luther King, and he's talking about, you know, being exiled on your own land, it sounds like a bunch of people who know their indigenous history still and heritage and lineage, know that commercially, economically, and politically within their area of region, they're having to work and blend into the new term that they're being described as free persons of color or free Negroes.
I didn't ask you that. So do you know what the nickname for the 1968 Civil Rights Movement was? What was it? The nickname of it? We know it was called the Civil Rights Movement in 1968. There were nicknames attached to it.
I'm unfamiliar with any other, maybe Black Love. I'm unfamiliar with the nicknames.
So it was, the nicknames was the Indian Civil Rights Act. They were fighting for the Indian Bill of Rights. They were also fighting for public Indian housing, right?
This program contains subject matter and language that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
Why don't black people think that they were the Indians? Why do niggas only think that they was fucking African? Okay? I'll tell you why. For one, the word semantics got you fucked up. For two, okay, the Dawes Commission. As you can see, this is from the U.S. Department of the Interior, okay? When you go to the U.S. Department of the Interior, you go to tribes and you research information on Dawes scrolls. I did this myself. I screenshotted this shit myself. I went there myself. And so that being said, it says what? Information on the Dawes rolls. The Dawes Commission was organized in 1893 to accept applications for tribal enrollment between 1899 and 1907 from the American Indians of the 5 civilized tribes who resided in the Indian Territory, which later became the eastern portion of Oklahoma. The 5 civilized tribes consist of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Seminole Indians, and Chickasaw Indians, okay? Now, with that being said, here's a paper on the Dawes roll. Now, these say identify Mississippi Choctaws. So what happened was, a part of one of the treaties in the Dawes Commission was to give land back to the Indians that was wrongfully taken, okay? And so, as you can see, this shit say Williamson Mill. Most of these motherfuckers is white. Age 30, male, full-blooded Indian. Name of father. And so what happens was with the Dawes rolls is the government allow other white people to pay $5 to get listed down as if they were an Aboriginal Indian, so that way they can receive the benefits of the land that the government was supposed to give back to the blacks. So when you look at motherfuckers on the Indian reservations today, and they getting $20,000 to $100,000 checks a month from the government can't come on the reservation, they got all them casinos, that's actually our shit. But the reason we don't claim it is because we don't think that we the motherfuckers that was over here too. And so this is where you get the term $5 Indian from, because white people allowed themselves to claim themselves as the Indians for $5 in order to receive the benefits from themselves that they were supposed to give to us. Okay? Now here's another joint right here. Another poster. All right? What year is this from? Let me find the date on it. 1902, July 1st. It says, the Commission of the 5 Civilized Tribes will continue in session. Okay? Notice given to all hereby free men listed as doubtful claimants that after May 31st, their cases will be considered and completed. Okay? Now this goes to, now you have to ask yourself, who the fuck is this nigga? Because this not a real Indian. Okay? So who is him? I'm finna show you. Okay? This is a $5 Indian. This is a Mexican. Okay? Don't worry, I got you. White people and Mexicans are the motherfuckers that's claiming today to be the Indians. Okay? Now let me show you how. If you go to an Indian reservation today, these are the two motherfuckers you gonna see. Okay? But these ain't the Negroes that the generals and the colonels was speaking about. These ain't the Seminoles and the Gullah warriors that they was worried about. So who the fuck are these people? If history already confirms that they call Indians blue-black via the word indigo, these motherfuckers ain't blue-black. If everybody, including the presidents of the United States of America, confirmed that the Indians were black and they were fighting back, who the fuck is these people? See, I got to show you how they got there. So we're going to do imposter versus original part 1. This is imposter. Now, these are original black Indians. This is a Crow tribesman. This picture was taken in 1873. As you can clearly fucking see, there's a huge difference. A huge difference. So we have to ask ourselves, how did our ancestors become these motherfuckers? Okay? I'm gonna give you the answer now. See? All non-Africans are Neanderthal. See? 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 Now, this is an African woman from Africa. These are the Andaman Island black people by China. This is a queen from Jamaica. This is a light-skinned Khoisan or San people from Africa. And this is a black Aboriginal Indian woman from America. And the point I'm trying to make is all black people stem from that mitochondrial Eve gene. This is why no matter what shade we are, we got them same distinct features. You're going to see that nose, you're going to see them lips, and you're going to see that body type. Okay? Now, if you're not of human descent, you're a Neanderthal. Okay? If you're not of the descent of the black woman, you're a Neanderthal. Now, why is this important? As you can see, this albino African right here still look like an African. But this Dravidian man, aka the motherfuckers that's in India, when they're albino, they look like him. Now, this dude right here at the top right with these freckles is not a white man. This is an albino Dravidian. The dude at the bottom is a white man. White people are genetically engineered Dravidians, and they're genetically dead Asians. This is why they call Caucasians. So what happens is when you take a white person and you mix them with a Chinese person and you mix them with a mulatto black person, you get a Mexican. So this is why racist white people call Mexicans spics, because a spick is like the equivalent to calling somebody a mutt. We know a dog mutt is mixed with a lot of races. This is why you see right here, this Mexican look just like this Chinese man. This Chinese man right here look like Genghis Khan, and he looked just like this Mexican. Same nose, same lip, everything. The only difference between Chinese people and Mexicans is Mexicans have white people. I mean, they're mixed with white people, aka Spaniards, and they're mixed with mulatto black people. So when white people, because the Chinese was over here too, don't get it fucked up. When Chinese people was raping motherfuckers in the Caribbeans, and Sir Francis Drake was doing his circumnavigation, and they was taking them mulattoes and having babies with them mulattoes, they started creating what you call Hispanics. Okay? So a Hispanic person is like the race of people that was created after mulattoes. So we know that mulattoes were not only created during slavery, Spanish people were too. Spanish people are a slavery-bred race of people. Okay? That shit needs to be understood. So now this is why Spanish people believe that they were the fucking Olmecs. This is why Mexicans try to argue you down about being the Olmecs, because they look like the Indians that was over there today. But they don't know that the Indians that was over there is the $5 Indian. The nigga on the right is a Native American. The nigga on the left is a Mexican. These are not the same people, but they look exactly the same. I'm trying to tell y'all, I got this shit down pat, man. The nigga on the right is what you call a $5 Indian. This is the nigga you gonna see when you go to an Indian reservation today. The nigga on the left is a Mexican. This the nigga you gonna see when you at any given mall in Los Angeles, okay? Why is this important? The nigga on the left think that he's original to the land. The nigga on the right think that he's original to the land, because they both have been finessed to take your place as the Indian, because you don't want to take your fucking place. Let's keep it moving. The nigga on the left is the nigga that you should see on the plantation. That's us. But the nigga on the right is who you see. This is the original Indian, and that's the $5 Indian. This is how they whitewash you from your history. Okay? Okay. And so now why is this important? Okay? The nigga on the right is receiving all your benefits. The nigga on the right, okay, is getting that $100,000 check. The nigga on the right is making that casino money, making that money and making all of that money that they make off the reservation, when really that shit should be coming to us. So when niggas get to talking about reparations for slavery, can we please include the money that they owe us for giving to these fake ass Indians? Because they owe us that too. See, y'all niggas got the game fucked up. Y'all niggas got the game fucked up. But don't worry, I'm gonna make sure we get it right. I'm gonna make sure we get it right. Now, this is proof that black people travel from North America to Africa and from Africa to North America. And I'm gonna do an entire lecture on this. I'm just giving y'all one snippet because I don't want to deter y'all minds from the Gullah Wars and have y'all, you know, too far back in history, thousands of years ago. This is the ancient Mayan presence in Egypt, okay? There is a temple in Egypt called the Maya Temple. It was sent to the Maya gatekeepers who are still living today, named Alun Jux Yakin, Han Bates Men, and Don Alejandro. Don Alejandro says that according to the Mayan tradition, their ancestors came from the Pleiades star system to the four corners of the earth, okay? Same with black people, Egypt, Dogon, everybody got the same creation story. But continuing on, one of those corners being North Africa, Egypt. They were known as the Naga Maya, okay? Naga meaning God, tribe, divinity. Maya meaning water in Mayans, okay? So Naga comes from the African word Nag, which means tribe and God and divinity and royalty. And Maya comes from a still spoken language today, okay, which means water. So Naga Maya translates into the tribe that came from across the water. Now on the left, okay, you see Mayan glyphs and architecture. Now on the right is a picture of a temple in Egypt, specifically in Saqqara. And these glyphs are in the Mayan temple, aka the Chapel of Maya. And when these glyphs were sent to these still today living heads of the Mayan culture, they confirmed that these were Mayan glyphs. So the Mayans, aka the Black Indians, Native Americans, Aboriginals, whatever the fuck you want to call them, were traveling to Egypt, and the blacks in Egypt were traveling to North America to Mayan civilization. So here's the thing, as I close this out. Why do y'all niggas keep trying to sustain the Aboriginal versus African argument when it has never been a versus until today?
Yeah, straight from Decatur. You know, wicked. You know what's going on. Yeah, that's right, we slanging billows. Just live by that.
Came up, came down, stayed down, grinded on, stayed real, caught the clown, took his crown with the steel, made moves, broke free, new deal, big D, 500, SEL, DC, ATL, real G's, feel good, smoke good, drink good, more cash, new car, new crib, same hood, make shoes, don't lie, won't die, won't snooze, don't front, don't bruise, beat the game, won't lose, ride a hoop, hit stoves, new gear, slang A, could quit, no fear, won't quit, wheels spray, call dog, snipers pack, rip tracks, 5-0, been one, cut out, shot one,
Nino Wicked. Coming straight from the dick. Ain't nothing but the billows. You know what I'm saying?
hit some, lawyer fees, sell old, smoke trees, roll deep, smell new, red or blue, casualties, Jack Wheat, Ghetto Mafia, Nino, Wicked, draw the line, world's cold, went gold, take soul, talking straight shake and bake, cash checks, break nicks. My money, can't hide, no love, gotta die. My town, too small, I want me. Voila, outrageous, front page, stickeroo, at large, FBI, drug raid, breakdown, in charge, beating clean, big bank, big dank, gon' pop you, high power, no problem, get back, get on my feet.
Y'all know it is, coming straight from Decatur. Ain't them with them billows. Get paid up in here. Big D. What's up, Decatur?
Came up, came down, stayed down, grinding along, stayed real, caught the clown, took his crown with the steel, made moves, break free, new deal, big D, 500, SEL, DC, ATL, real G, feel good, smoke good, drink good, more cash, new car, new crib, same hood, max choose, don't lie, won't die, won't snooze, can't front, don't bruise, beat the game, won't lose, ride hoopty, hit stores, new gear, slang yay, can't quit, no fear, won't quit, real spray, call dog, snipers pack, rip tracks, 5-0, bang one, cut one, shot one, wicked!
Got here straight from the dick. Now this ain't Compton, it's Decatur. Ain't nothing but them billows. No, I said billows, not billows, billows. What's up, Decatur? East Point. What's the last one?
The life of Rosa Parks. She sat down to stand up for civil rights. 90 years ago, when Rosa Parks was growing up in Alabama, life was very unfair in the world she lived in. Black and white people were not treated equally, even though under the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, the law said they must be. Instead, the government came up with a trick called separate but equal, which meant that people could still be segregated by race and skin color. In bathrooms, in shops, in restaurants, and at drinking fountains. Not very equal, right? Rosa Parks was born on February 4th, 1913. Her mother was a teacher and her father was a carpenter. When her parents separated, she moved to Montgomery in Alabama to live on her grandparents' farm. From there, she had to walk to school. Only white kids could use the bus. When her grandmother became sick and needed care, she was forced to quit school and look after her. At 19, Rosa met Raymond Parks, a barber and political activist in the fight for equal rights. They fell in love and soon they got married. Now, with his encouragement, she went back to studying and finished high school. At that time, less than 7% of the black community graduated high school, so Rosa already stood out from the rest. After graduating, she settled into married life and took on a bunch of jobs, like doing laundry, mopping hospital floors, working in domestic service, and sewing and repairing clothes. Through her husband Raymond, Rosa got involved in the important work at the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Soon after, she started working as a secretary at the office in Montgomery, Alabama. She was busy investigating cases of racial injustice. What makes Rosa Parks so famous is what she did on December 1st, 1955. First, you gotta know that, at the time, the buses in Montgomery were divided. A seating area for white people, and a seating area in the back for black people. If more white passengers needed seats, then black passengers had to move further back and stand. If there was no standing room, they had to get off the bus. That's how unequally people were treated. After a long day at work, Rosa caught the bus home. She was worn out, physically tired, and tired of all the unfairness she saw around her. She took her seat, but as the bus filled up, 2 or 3 white passengers were left standing. The bus driver asked Rosa to give up her seat and move to the back. She politely refused and stayed put. Think what guts that takes. I felt a determination cover my body like a quilt on a winter's night, she later said. The driver called the police and she was arrested and put in jail. On Monday, December 5th, 1955, the day of Rosa's trial for disorderly conduct where she was found guilty, the black community of Montgomery were organized, determined, and ready to act with a peaceful protest. They handed out leaflets that said,
"We are asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. You can afford to stay out of school for one day. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups, do not ride the bus at all on Monday."
That Monday, no one used the buses. Everyone stuck to the boycott. People organized car sharing. Cabs charge only 10 cents for a ride, and a lot of the 40,000 people just walked. Do you have any idea how long they kept up the protest? 381 days. That's more than a year. Imagine how tough that must have been. Their victory came a year later when the Supreme Court said the segregation on public transport was against the law. Rosa Parks devoted the rest of her life to the fight for equal rights. Rosa wasn't the first to refuse to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Don't forget brave women like Lily Mae Bradford, Irene Morgan, and Claudette Colvin, and other activists before her who did the same. Rosa Parks died in Detroit, Michigan in 2005 at the age of 92. Today, Rosa's defiance remains a symbol for us of everything we admire: courage, integrity, dignity, and true determination.
Remember this Native American lady? Who is that? You don't remember her? She looks familiar. What if I showed you a younger pic? There she is. Native woman, very friendly to the colored, the Negroes. Jail? Then she did something bad. What in the world? Wait a second. Remember her? Yeah. The Native American woman who considers herself black because her country considered her black and treated her as such. Wait, what? She didn't come here off a slave ship. This is crazy. She was already here. Wow.
Halito tribe. Right now, I'm down here in Montgomery, Alabama, one of the major places of the civil rights movement, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, the house right across the street back there is the house that he lived in from, I believe, 1950 to 1960.
February is a celebration of Black History Month. In Montgomery, Alabama, people from all over the country have the chance to take a full tour of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s home from front to back. One significant piece of history that everyone gets to see face to face is the bombing that took place while King was living in his home. Many people are shocked when they find out that there is still an indentation in the front porch where the bomb detonated.
Here right beside me is the home of Dr. Martin Luther King from 1954 until 1960. King was at Ralph Missionary Baptist Church when he got the phone call that his house had been bombed with his wife and children inside.
Reverend King was downtown at a meeting, and his wife was at home with their young baby, Yolanda, and the wife of a deacon of the church, Mary Lucy Williams was her name. Reverend King did not want her to be home alone because he had begun to receive threats on his life as well as his family's life. They were in the front room of the home where they heard a noise on the porch. They immediately went to the back bedroom and the bomb went off.
While in the home, visitors get to see King's bedrooms, bathrooms, and more. Muhammad tells us that most tourists have a favorite part of the house.
The kitchen. Because that is where Reverend King experienced his epiphany. where he heard God speak to him and tell him, be not afraid, and to go forward with his work in the civil rights movement.
The many tours that are given daily, Muhammad tells us, whether far or near, mostly all who visit King's home leave feeling more uplifted than when they entered the home.
They are very humbled. They seem to connect with the home. I think the home has a peace about it, and they seem to connect with that and identify with that. They are very surprised to see that we have so many authentic items in the home that were used by Reverend and Mrs. King.
Halito family, I'm down here in Montgomery, Alabama, one of the major places of the civil rights movement. In fact, it's the place where the famous boycott with Rosa Parks jumped off at, led by Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King lived right here in this house behind me from like 1950 to 1960. He was the pastor here in Montgomery, Alabama. Now here's the thing. One thing I want to show you, I came to put my feet on the ground because I want to show you once again the area that Dr. King lived in. This area is a predominantly black area. So back then, civil rights time, it would have been a black area with white people coming through. Now, what I want y'all to understand, I told you there's certain things we have to pay attention to, and one of those things is geographical locations in these stories being told about the Indian. Now here, we're in Montgomery, Alabama, where Dr. King lived in a predominantly black neighborhood, as he did in the house he grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. I also showed you that. Somebody's missing from this equation a set of Indians. They're missing from this equation. In this area, there was no presence of Native American Indians. There's no presence of them, or not a strong presence of them, if there were some here. So this is what I want you to understand. In 1968, Dr. King had a lot of people who looked like us, organized and fighting for Indian civil rights. Again, somebody's missing from this equation if they're going to tell the story that we were fighting for the rights of them, right? I want us to start connecting the basic dots. Remember, I told you this docuseries is simply about creating the basic dots, scratching your head saying, this don't make sense, right? So once again, we have a set of people telling us we all come from Africa and all life comes from Africa, and that's fine and dandy, cool. Now I have to ask the question, well, who were those Indians in 1968 that were fighting for Indian civil rights? Who were they and where did they go? There was a man here, because there are no Native American Indians in this area. There are no Indians from India in this area. I mean, unless maybe they run a gas station in today's time or the local convenience store, you don't see a presence of them. So who were those Indians that were organized in 1968 fighting for Indian civil rights? Public Indian housing, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and the Indian Bill of Rights. Let's pull those pictures up from Alabama and let's look at those people organized with Dr. King. Those were people from his community. Those were people in those pictures from his community. This is my family's roots down here, Birmingham, Bessemer, Alabama. This is my family's roots down here. My grandmother is from Alabama. There was a large presence of people who looked like us in this area. 1968, it was nicknamed the Indian Civil Rights Act at the signing after Dr. King passed away. Somebody is missing from that equation. Somebody was missing at that signing. A group of Indians were missing. There were no Native Americans at that signing in 1968. There were no Native American Indians at that signing in 1968. There were no Indians from India at that signing in 1968 after Dr. King was assassinated. But guess who was there? There were some people who looked like us, looked like me, looked like your grandmother, your uncles, your aunts, your family members, your bloodline, who at some point in their life, an elder told you they had Indian in them or they were Indian. Is it starting to make sense? What benefit would I have as an African fighting for Indians? What do I benefit as an African? And I got my own problems here in Montgomery, Alabama. What do I benefit fighting for Indians who's not even in my community, on a reservation somewhere? I'll once again explain how that worked. Dr. King said in one of his famous speeches, no one is free until we're all free. The world was watching the civil rights movement. The world was watching the civil rights movement that was going on here in Montgomery and also Birmingham, Alabama. The world was watching what was going on. People were inspired by what we did in the civil rights movement. Dr. King said, no one is free until we're all free. So with that being said, we had a specific fight here in Montgomery. We had a specific fight in Birmingham. We had a specific fight in Memphis, in Georgia, in Virginia, in New York, in the Midwest. We had a specific fight over here in the Southeast, up the East Coast, right? But our fight benefited other groups of people around the world. Again, after Dr. King was assassinated and the riots jumped off in over 100 cities in America, there were no Indians from India in those riots, rioting with people that look like us. There were no Native American Indians rioting. There were no Native American Indians rioting. What did those Indians look like that was tearing up 100 cities across America due to the death of Dr. King? Look at those pictures. Pull up the riot pictures. Pull up the riot videos. Once again, someone is missing from this equation. If we allow people to continue to tell our story, they'll continue to tell you this wasn't about you. You came from across the water, someplace called Africa, and we wiped away your whole history. They'll continue to tell you you're not the real Indians of America who were reclassified to color, to Negro, to blacks, to African Americans, to niggers. But they are the real Indians. This is what people would tell you when they're inserting themselves into your story. Now in this area, there's no presence of Native American Indians. There's no presence of Indians from India in this area. There's no presence of them in Atlanta, Memphis, Florida. There's no presence of these people. So why is it when they tell the story of the American Indian, for some reason, these people incorporate themselves into our story as if it's about them, as if the story's about them, because they call themselves the real Indians of America, and they say we're stealing their culture. Now I'll tell you this, those Native American Indians, they have a story on this land. It's just not our story. It's just not our story. The same way Our story isn't their story. I want to show you something. Check this out. This is their story. And I want you to tell me if you have any family members who ever told you about them trying to take over an abandoned prison in San Francisco, or the longest walk from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. Does this sound like anything your family member, your bloodline ever told you about?
Many of us know about the Civil Rights Movement, which is when Black Americans heroically fought for social justice and equality during the 1950s and 1960s. Unfortunately, the American Indian Civil Rights Movement is often overlooked. So what is it exactly? The American Indian Civil Rights Movement, or the American Indian Movement, AIM, as it's sometimes called, was established in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1968 by a group of activists, namely Dennis Banks, Clyde Belcourt, Eddie Benton Benai, and George Mitchell. It originally aimed to improve conditions for Native Americans who had been urbanized and were living in ghettos after government programs forced them out of their reservations. However, AIM eventually encompassed everything that American Indians were demanding. More specifically, it fought for economic independence, the revitalization of their traditional culture, the protection of their legal rights, autonomy over tribal areas, and the restoration of lands that they had owned but were illegally seized from them. The founding of AIM came nearly a decade after the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was passed. Also referred to as Public Law 959 and the Adult Vocational Training Program, this legislation encouraged Native Americans to leave their reservations and traditional lands in order to assimilate into urban areas. Thousands of Native Americans did end up migrating to cities and other such urban areas. However, they experienced low-wage labor, substandard housing, discrimination, and violence. The initial activities of AIM were meant to help the Native Americans suffering in urban areas in Minneapolis. For example, they established the AIM Patrol to provide help and support to victims of police abuse. The organization also founded the Indian Health Board, which focused on providing Native-centric healthcare. As the years passed, AIM widened its focus to Native Americans outside of Minneapolis. For instance, it participated in the occupation of Alcatraz Island, which took place November 20th, 1969 to June 11th, 1971. This months-long protest saw 89 Native Americans and their supporters living on Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay. They tagged buildings with slogans like "Red Power" and "Custer had it coming," in reference to George Armstrong Custer, the military commander known for his post-Civil War exploits against Native Americans. He's particularly famous for the 1876 Battle of the Little Bighorn, which has since come to be known as Custer's Last Stand. The Native Americans who participated in the occupation claimed that Alcatraz Island belonged to their people by right of discovery. However, the Nixon administration maintained that transferring the land to them was impossible. In the months that followed, the Native American population on Alcatraz Island swelled to more than 600. They even managed to form a governing council, a clinic, and a security force dubbed the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs, among other things. Unfortunately, their movement was quashed when they were forcibly removed by armed federal marshals. AIM participated in many other movements besides the occupation of Alcatraz Island. One of their most famous actions was the Longest Walk, which took place in July 1978 and saw a few hundred people trekking from Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, California. By the time they arrived in Washington, D.C., the marchers had swelled to more than 30,000. The Longest Walk hoped to raise awareness for the problems plaguing Native American communities across the United States, such as the lack of job opportunities and inadequate housing. Perhaps its biggest achievement, though, was the signing of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, which lifted the ban on Native American spiritual ceremonies, which had been outlawed since 1884.
Unfortunately, AIM's national leadership disbanded later that year due to infighting, jealousy, and the FBI's alleged efforts to divide them. Fortunately, several local chapters remained active afterward.
I don't resonate with that story. Why? Because that's not my people's story. That's the Native American Indians' story. This is why you don't see the American Indians in their pictures, in their videos of their story. Same reason why you don't see them here in Montgomery, Alabama, or at the signing for the Indian Civil Rights Movement. There were two separate fights going on between two different groups of Indians. You have to know the difference when they're referenced. That's what this docuseries is for. Remember, I said I'm gonna walk you very slow. When people mention Indians, they don't look at people like us because we've been taught that the Indian don't look like us. We've been taught that the Indians look like the Native American Indians. The Indians on the reservations. The Indians with the teepees. We don't come from teepees. I don't know how many of you have ever lived in teepees. I've never seen a teepee in these type neighborhoods where I come from. So I want y'all to start putting the basic dots together. This is what we're doing with this docuseries. Let's find out how many Native Americans you can find in the Montgomery boycott struggle down here. Pull up a video and show me a bunch of Native Americans who was fighting with Rosa Parks and Dr. King. Because those people who were fighting with Rosa Parks and Dr. King and here in Montgomery are the same people who was fighting for Indian civil rights in 1968 also.
Choctaw, and then I'm Choctaw on both sides. I'm a Choctaw on my father's side and my mother's side. So, zero African. Zero. No African at all. None. And most people, this is the case with most people. There is no African in most of us. You know, we believe for so long that we got this skin tone because of whatever. What would you call it? Just, you know, our Caucasian grandfathers making us lighter, and then we come down, and then we're still black, but we're just a lighter version or whatever. And it's like, nah. My great-great-grandparents was the same shade that I am. But, you know, they were wearing feather earrings and they were wearing ponchos and all of that stuff. And they look like me. They got a nose like this. They got hair. I can't grow a beard. You know what I'm saying? I don't have one on my mom's side. I don't have one male relative that can grow a beard. Some of us can grow this right here. That's the most. And a little bit up here. And that's it. All of that is like baby skin. Like with no beards at all. None. That is a trait from our tribe. I've met other people from our tribe. They can't even grow this right here. It's hard to believe that they had those little ass boats trout. Bro, let me tell you something about those boats. Number one, they can't show you a boat, right? They can show you dinosaur bones that's supposed to be from 8 billion years ago, which that's a fucking sham, but we're not even gonna get into that. But they can show you dinosaur bones, but they can't show you no slave ships. Yeah, it's some bullshit. And I've done extensive research over the last couple years on the slave ships. And I ain't gonna get into all the details of what I found. I'm just gonna tell you this. The slave trade is a fucking farce and is a fucking lie. Period. End of fucking discussion. All you gotta do is use your fucking critical thinking. Right? And cause see, nobody asks the questions. Nobody asks. When they hear these things, they just accept them. They don't ask questions. They don't ask, okay, how long does it take for me to get in a wooden boat and sail over from the East Coast to West Africa? How long is that trip, round trip? Nobody asked that question. You want to know the answer to that? 4 months. 4 months, right? So, then, of course, the other questions start to come into play, right? Okay, how much food and water do I have to pack for X amount of people for 4 months coming over here to, you know what I'm saying? You ask that question right there, right? And how do you fit all of that on the boat with the people you know, now you start to see a picture that doesn't make sense. Because then you say, okay, now if you stack those people all on top of each other, the way that they tell you that they stack people up, right? Where do they piss and shit at? Because eventually it's going to become toxic and people going to start getting sick and dying, right? So now your whole picture, this whole narrative starts to fall apart. And then the place where it really falls apart is the place where people don't even think, right? They don't even think, what does the water look like, right? Because, oh, and I think somebody said it up top. Those waves are so crazy. Just go do a search and look at what the North Atlantic waves look like. Nobody can sail that. Trust me. And you're telling me that they brought 30 million people back and forth over that? Doesn't make any sense. I mean, it just, all the logic just fails. And it's just like, okay, all right, I'm a white English settler and I want to enslave some people because I'm lazy and I don't want to do any work. So to do this, I'm going to chop down a bunch of trees and build some boats. That's work. I'm going to sail over, make this 4-month round trip, kidnap and beat some people and kidnap. That's some more work, and bring them over for several hundred years back and forth. That's work. Where's the logic in that? Now, if I'm one of these white people that want to enslave somebody to do some work for them, I'm like, well, we got these natives here. They're nice and strong, and yeah. And we could give them some alcohol and manipulate them, and yeah. Makes way more sense, doesn't it? Makes way more sense. But man, you try to sell some of these so-called Negroes that they're not from Africa, they want to fight you. It's ridiculous. And it's just like a little bit of critical thinking. Just a little bit of critical thinking. It's insane.
This is a reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we're coming to get our check.